What's up, and welcome to Cam's Corner, where we talk about everything CSU sports. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the potential starting lineups for CSU basketball next season, what next season could look like for Nico Medved and the crew after signing a huge extension with CSU, as well as some new transfers in and transfers out that could potentially affect the state of CSU's men's basketball. After an exciting last season where we won into the brackets and then unfortunately got knocked out by Texas, CSU looks to bounce back and continue their great reign of NCAA title appearances with having a couple within the last couple, with having two in the last couple of years. And we now have a brand new roster. Obviously, you have things happening like Isaiah Stevens entering into the NBA draft, as well as Nick Clifford entering into the NBA draft, but later pulling out and deciding to spend one more year at CSU. So what can this team do, led by Nico Medved, with their best player being Nick Clifford, who could have had potential to get drafted this year, but wanted to come back, build his name a little bit more, maybe allow for him to get even better chance to get drafted in that first round of the NBA draft. So looking at this roster, we have a lot of different new players on this roster just in general, right? Let's first take a look at the roster from last year. So if we take a look at last year's roster here. Names like Patrick Cartier, who transferred out, is now at UC Irvine. You got Kyle Evans, who didn't play much for us, but also transferred himself. Players like Joel Scott graduating. Baylor Hebb no longer being there. Tavy Jackson also gone. A lot of these players that were pivotal role players are no longer on the squad. Joe Palmer graduating as well. You get down a little bit. Isaiah Rivera no longer being there either. This roster is heavily altered from last season, and it's going to be interesting to see what kind of adjustments Nico makes and able to get his roster back on track to potentially make it back into that NCAA tournament and get one of those bids. So now we took a look at last year's roster. Let's take a look at what we are looking at this year for the roster and see what kind of stuff we got that has changed up a little bit. Let's look at the roster for 2024 real quick. And something about this roster is Nico's done a great job of building up the stature of CSU. People want to come to CSU now. So let's go player by player here. You got Kyan Evans. And Kyan is going to be one of those players that has to step up large from the role that he took on last year. Kyan's probably going to be the starting one for this CSU squad this year. He showed some potential off the bench last year, but a lot of his minutes were taken up by Tavy Jackson. So now Kyan has the reins of this offense, of this defense for CSU, and he has big shoes to fill with one of the best CSU basketball players of all time, Isaiah Stevens, entering the NBA draft. So if I had to guess who's our starting point guard next year, I'm looking at Kyan Evans to step up in a huge way and fill that huge void that was left by Isaiah Stevens. Going down the roster, somebody we really need to talk about right here is Jalen Crocker Johnson. Now, something about Jalen Crocker Johnson is the fact that he was picked up and he was the freshman of the year. Let's take a look at the Colorado page. This is a great article by one of the best reporters on CSU basketball right here in Kevin Lytle, writing for the Colorado down in Loveland. If you don't know about Kevin and you're a CSU basketball fan, you need to learn about this guy at every game. Does a lot of great reporting as well. Let's look at what he has on Jalen Crocker Johnson. So Jalen Crocker Johnson, 6'8", Ohio Valley Conference Freshman of the Year. Started 32 games and averaged 9 points, 5 rebounds, and 50% from the field. So this guy is he could be a big wing for CSU and somebody that could potentially start at that 2-guard spot as well. And so another thing about Jalen Crocker is he had offers. He was not just a guy that only had a CSU offers. There was talk about offers from UConn and other large programs for Jalen Crocker Johnson, and he committed to CSU. There's whispers around the Mountain West programs that this guy could be easily a newcomer of the year award winner in the Mountain West and could potentially even fight for a Mountain West Player of the Year spot. Jalen Crocker Johnson is one of our best pickups in the transfer portal that we've had in a very long time. And I would put my money on Jalen Crocker Johnson having a huge role on this CSU squad. Jalen Crocker is he's going to fill a gap that's being left with size and Nick Clifford and Jalen Crocker Johnson on the same court at the same time. With all that size, all the length they have, the defense that they're able to bring to that CSU squad, that's going to be an absolute problem for the Mountain West this season. I promise you that. So I don't know if you start Jalen Crocker at the 2, maybe you start him at the 3, and then you start Nick Clifford at the 4. Or if you do something like bring Keyshawn Evans right here off and put him in that starting lineup. Keyshawn is, a great shooter as well as a great defender on the wing. Keyshawn brings a little bit more shot making than Crocker does, but doesn't have the same length and doesn't have the same amount of defense that you get with a guy like Crocker, right? So that's something to think about as well. And then there's even more competition for that 2-guard spot with Bowen Bourne. Bowen Bourne's another transfer who comes from who's out of Northern Iowa. So we got a Northern Iowa guy in Bowen Bourne here. Bowen is a consistent guy on the court. 12.6 points at Northern Iowa. Career high came 17.9 points in his junior season as well. So this guy's a certified bucket. With Isaiah Stevens leaving, Isaiah was a great passer, but he was also our leading scorer by far. So we need somebody to fill that void. And although Neek is great and has his spurts, there's some times where Neek doesn't shoot the ball as much as he should, right? So you bring a guy like Bowen Bourne in, who was one of the top guys at Northern Iowa, slot him into that starting lineup. He could be the main scorer for the CSU squad, and I think that they should go with Bowen Bourne at that 2-guard spot, just because if you look at the guys surrounding him in that starting lineup, right? You got, let's say the starting lineup, we know the center. A guy that really solidified his name last year at the center position. That's going to be Rashawn Memba. Rashawn Memba is a big guy at that center spot, and he's going to be able to bring the rebounding as well as the post scoring. Rashawn Memba is the bona fide stud. He's going to start for this squad. Rashawn Memba had a great season last year. Let's just look at some of his stats from last year. Let's go back one season. Yeah, so Rashawn Memba, not going to be your big scoring guy, but remember last year we had a guy like Patrick Cartier, who was known for his scoring, known for his three-point shooting, right? And Memba was coming off the bench. But the thing that Memba brought that Patrick Cartier did not was the size. He has the girth, he has the length, he has the athleticism to defend a lot of those great Mountain West centers like Ledee over in San Diego State and areas like that. He's a vital part of the reason we beat San Diego State. Rashawn Memba comes in the game last year and absolutely dominates defensively, right? So Rashawn Memba is a guy that is gonna be a anchor for your defense. Rashawn Memba, I feel like you ask anybody that knows CSU basketball, they're super excited, super happy to see Rashawn Memba take over this starting role for the CSU center spot, and I think he's going to do phenomenal. So you got Kyan Evans at the run, Rashawn Memba at the 5, Nick Clifford at the 3. Let's throw Bourne in at the 2, right? A bona fide stud who could score a little bit. And then you're looking at the 4, you're probably just looking at Jalen Crocker Johnson, right? Jalen Crocker Johnson probably slides really well into that 4 spot. And something about this CSU team is, although the guards are a little smaller, with Bourne being not as big of a guard as you'd like. I think he's 5'10", 5'11" for Bowen Bourne. And then you got Kyan Evans, who's 6'2", so a tall guard, but doesn't really have the weight to defend some of those really good guards in the Mountain West. The bottom 3, your front court for the CSU Rams squad, is huge. You have a huge front court with 6'6" Nick Clifford. He plays like he's 6'8". Jalen Crocker Johnson is 6'8". And then Rashawn Memba, that big guy in the middle that's able to defend almost anybody in the Mountain West. So there's going to be a lot of length with this CSU team. And the one place I think they're going to struggle is that scoring aspect, which is where I think Bowen Bourne comes in. This is a great pickup for Nico Medved and the Rams. Bowen Bourne's going to be able to come in, have free will, shooting wherever he wants, whenever he wants, three-pointers. He has a really good mid-range game as well. I think Bowen Bourne is going to be a great guy for the CSU squad, and I think he'll have a great season for CSU in general. So if I was to guess the starting five for this squad, right, you got Kyan, Bowen, with Keyshawn Williams maybe slotting in there as well. Obviously, we don't know what we're thinking about the Bowen versus Keyshawn type of thing right now. But Bowen could also come off the bench as a very effective sixth man. Somebody you need to bring the power, somebody you need to bring the energy when the Rams are down. Somebody like a Joe Palmer last year. Although Joe wasn't as good of a scorer as Bowen is, you know that Joe, when he came in the game, he was going to bring the athleticism, the rebounds, the dunks, everything that you need to know about Bowen or about Joe Palmer, Bowen has, right? But he has a little bit more of that scoring aspect. So maybe you bring Bowen off the bench, maybe you bring Keyshawn. For me, I think it's Bowen. So that's my guess for the starting five last year. We also cannot forget about a guy like Jalen Lake. Jalen Lake last year comes in a lot of these games, and although he sometimes struggled, right, he had some games where he didn't perform his best, some games where he struggled to shoot from the field, but then he comes in and he, drops 16 versus Nevada. He's somebody that's not scared to just chuck up some threes, which is what you need. And Jalen Lake is a versatile defender as well as he has that great athleticism you need out of him. So you got a bench unit of Jalen Lake with Bowen. That's a bench that I'm confident in can be one of the best two-mans off the bench in the Mountain West, right? So looking at some of his minutes here, starts off a little slow, but then in the middle of the season against Colorado, 16, goes 5 for 7 from the field, 3 for 5 from 3. Adams State, we don't care about that Adams State game, let's be honest. You keep going down here. New Mexico, 3 for 5 from 3. Scores 9 points. He's a three-point shooter that is not scared to let loose and can have these games like up against Nevada where he scores 16. This one right here. 16, 3 for 3 for 3. So he's just a guy that's going to chuck up the threes, going to play some versatile defense, as well as be able to get some rebounds and bring that energy off the bench, right? So, for me, the CSU squad has a really good chance of competing. They got a lot of good transfers in, and obviously the loss of a guy like Isaiah Stevens is going to hurt. But, that's something that you're going to have to power through. Another guy we had potential of losing this year but decided against it was a guy like Nick Clifford, right? And we're going to go back to Kevin Lytle, who, once again, is one of the best reporters about CSU men's basketball. This story right here is a phenomenal article about how Nick decided he was not going to go to the draft. Nick was literally at the airport with the deadline approaching. Is he going to get the draft? Is he going to, go to the combine? He got the combine invite. He goes back to Colorado, decides against it, and now is going to be the centerpiece of this CSU squad. Nick's another guy that can definitely be up there for the Mountain West Player of the Year, and it would not surprise me if he gets that, right? Nick has to be the leader of this team, has to be vocal, has to be the guy that comes out and says, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is the stuff that we are going to do to be successful. So with Nick in this leadership role, you got a lot of positives going on for the CSU squad. I mean, although it looks bad, right? CSU is an up-and-coming program. David Roddy going in the first round to the Grizzlies, now on the Phoenix Suns. That's a guy that put a lot of great minutes in for the Grizzlies. Obviously, the Suns roster is a little more top-heavy, a little more crowded. Got a couple minutes in the playoffs and performed very well. CSU's on the up and up, and they have been for the last couple of years, and this is a squad that can do some damage in this Mountain West Conference. Compete with the Utah States, compete with the San Diego States. You can't forget about New Mexico, who had a great run last year as well. The Mountain West has shown in the last couple of years that they are not a conference to be messed with in the NCAA, and they have Power 5 potential. They've beat several Power 5 teams. Last year, you look at CSU beating Creighton. Creighton was a top 10 team in the AP polls at the end of the season. And CSU was able to take them down on a neutral court, able to do what they got to do to beat one of those elite teams in the NCAA, right? So for this team, it's looking positive for us. So let's go back to the roster here, right? Let's look at the new 2024 roster. You got other guys that are coming in as well. We got our freshmen coming in. Charlie Dortch from Fort Collins, Jaden Steep from over in Oregon as well. Lots of potential for this squad, and I think they're going to do great in this season, and a lot of people are sleeping on them. Another guy people sometimes forget is on our roster. We got Kyle Jorgensen. Kyle Jorgensen is a guy that's been here for a couple years, a guy that's been a staple for this bench unit. Hasn't gotten too many minutes in the last couple years because of that crowded center room. But with a guy like Patrick Cartier now not being there, transferring, moving on, going to a different school, you can get some good minutes out of Kyle Jorgensen. You can have the ability to bring Kyle Jorgensen off the bench as another big to back up Rashawn Memba, right? So overall, I think this CSU squad's going to do really well in this next season. There's a lot of new pieces you got to look at, but everybody should be really excited about the two transfers in Bowen Bourne as well as Jalen Crocker-Johnson. I think these are two transfers that went kind of under the radar, but Jalen Crocker-Johnson, like I said, had offers from so many schools, Power 5 schools, Group of 5 schools, and he chose to come to CSU. And that's because of how Nico Medved has turned around this program and made it one of the best teams in the Mountain West again. I think CSU, last year, talking about that game versus Texas in the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, we have to talk about that game versus Texas in the NCAA tournament. Jesus, that brings back some bad memories, let me tell you. They start off so strong. They start off on a 9-0 run, and then all of a sudden the offense falls stagnant, to say the very least. They still had a chance to win that game at the end. I think they scored, 40-something points in total? And they had a great start. 44 points in total and only lost by 12. This game versus Texas was a really tough game to watch. They score 11 points in the first half. 11 points in the first half. Let's look at some stats from this game. You only get 10 from Stevens. You get 10 from Scott. Neek only gets you 7. Look at this bench unit as well. You don't get much from Jalen Lake. He's going to have to be a guy that steps up and performs well for this squad. Rashawn Memba as well. He's going to have the pivotal role on him. He's going to be the guy at center this year, and a lot of people are very, very excited about that. So overall, point of this podcast episode, if you're a CSU men's basketball fan and you're scared about next season because you saw Isaiah Stevens leave, how do we recover from one of our best players of all time going into the draft? Kyan Evans is going to be the key to that. A guy that had experience last year. Didn't play much in this game, but he was a pivotal guy off the bench. We've seen Nico stick to these 7 or 8 man rotations before in the past. With the 7 men being this year, I mean, it's pretty solidified that you're going to have Bowen. You're going to have Crocker as well coming in for you, with Memba, Kyan, and Neek starting. And then, a guy like Jalen Lake still being around off the bench. So a 7 or 8 man rotation with those people. And then you got Kyle Jorgensen off the bench, who knows the system, has been here 3 or 4 years, knows what Nico needs him to do off the bench. This is not a team to be slept on. This is a team that will have some potential and will have the ability to get back to this tournament and hopefully score more than 11 points in a half. So yeah, overall, I think that this CSU men's basketball squad is going to have a lot of potential. They're going to do great, and they're going to have the ability to continue to dominate in the Mountain West. You know, you got teams like San Diego State, you got New Mexico, you got Wyoming is kind of fallen off the map since Graham Ike transferred to Gonzaga. Wyoming's kind of out of the picture for that top Mountain West spot right now. But don't be surprised if CSU surprises a lot of people this year and competes for that number one spot. I mean, you're always battling San Diego State, but we were able to take them down last year. Obviously, without Isaiah, there's going to be a lot of new adjustments that Nico's going to have to make before heading into this season. But me personally, I'm very excited to see what CSU can do and how they're going to be able to navigate the new plays, the new system that they're going to have without the elite passer and point guard that Isaiah Stevens was. And some of these transfers we got, I'm telling you right now, Jalen Crocker Johnson has potential to be a Mountain West All-First Team player. And it wouldn't surprise me if him and Neek are on that list. You know, so overall, CSU men's basketball is here to stay. Don't be worried about what's happened in the past. Right now and in the future, CSU men's basketball is going to ball out. I can promise you that. Thanks so much for tuning in to Cam's Corner. Probably going to do more episodes of this. Maybe next time we'll talk about CSU football with their new additions as well. Torrey Horton being one of the best receivers in the FBS. But thanks so much. I'm Cameron Evig.